Hello everybody. Absolutely delighted to welcome you all to our first Black All Year event. My name's Steph Adusei, and this was really kind of something that I wanted to do. So I'm absolutely delighted. We've had actually over 80 people have booked on to today's event. So they'll either be watching live or they'll watch the recording. And the reason it came about, I thought I'd just share that with you. So every October, I'm invited to talk to a huge range of audiences about equality, diversity and inclusion, and about being a Black female leader. And I'm always happy to do that. But I got quite frustrated that everyone wanted to talk about race during Black History Month in the UK. But then it all went quiet. And for the rest of the year, nobody said anything at all. And after all, those of us that are Black all year round. And I kept saying, somebody should do something. We should do events all year round that talk about experiences of being Black and achievements of Black people and the like. And nothing really happened. So being the person that does, I decided I had to make it happen. And that's how we've got Black All Year. So I'm really hoping that these events will highlight the issues, the challenges, the achievements and the experiences of Black people and the minoritised global majority. So I was lucky enough to meet Ranjit last summer when she came to see me as a coaching client, and I was immediately struck by her passion, by her intelligence and by her humanity. Over the last few months, I've been really fortunate to watch her journey, and I think she's going to share some of that with us today and see the creation of her dream come true. She spent the last 28 years with the NHS in England, and she started as a junior and rose up to a senior management position before she left. She's registered with the British Psychological Society with a Master of Science, and she's got a real passion for innovating workplace behaviours whilst embedding a culture of psychological safety. And now she runs the Behaviour Garage. So I'm absolutely delighted that she's our first speaker. I'm really looking forward to hearing just a tiny snippet of what she teaches and having her share her passion with us all.
Well, thank you very much, Steph, for that lovely welcome there. And thank you for introducing me. As Steph just said, I'm Ranjit Curtin, and I am the founder of the Behaviour Garage. But I think it's important for me to share why, before I start, why the Behaviour Garage came about. And I would like to just briefly share my story of how I describe exclusion with inhumanity. So just the summary of my life, really. Born in Kent in 1975, my parents were legal immigrants from Punjab in India at the time. And from the ages of 1 till 11, I experienced some exclusion just through growing up in the streets of Kent at the time. The National Front at the time were quite rife. So often playing in the street with children wasn't allowed because we were at fear of harm from this group of people at the time who were against people of colour being in our country. So often, instead of playing outside in the streets, I was playing inside with my brothers and sisters, avoiding such harm. But by the age of 11, my parents decided to move up north, where they bought a little corner shop. As delightful as that was and exciting as that was for us, we were also then met by the stigma of Sikh families owning corner shops. We were the only people of colour at the time in a little village known as Hetonley Hall. So although it's important to say throughout this session, welcomed by many, excluded by a bunch of people who weren't going to welcome us into the area. And we suffered a lot of racist abuse at the time and the stereotyping of Sikh shop owners at the time. School for me wasn't much better. During my school years, I was often excluded from religious education as the only person of colour in the school at the time, me, my brother and sister. Our religious education teacher felt it was acceptable to put me out of the class at the time, and that was accepted in the 80s. Whenever there was Christmas nativities plays, etc., I was excluded from them because at the time I had no part in that. I left school with no friends and very little education. Although my parents' dream would be that I would be a shopkeeper, I decided that I was going to be an executive in the NHS. I was going to be somebody who really has a part in the NHS. So in my very young years, of the sweet age of 19, I joined the NHS, and at the time, as they were known at the time, as an auxiliary nurse. And as Steph explained, leading up over the 28 years into a senior management position. But again, important to say, included by many, unfortunately, the micro few who chose to exclude me or cause harm, bullying, harassment, stigmatizing, stereotyping, inappropriate banter, I would say went on in every organisation I went to. And I moved around the trusts quite a lot. I moved around chasing the dream of finding an organisation that truly will include me for who I am and what I have to offer. But despite that moving around, and despite the many people in healthcare who passionately included me in and made me part of the healthcare family, it was those micro few that didn't, that made me leave in the end. Because while I was in my senior manager post and now 28 years into working in healthcare, while I protected my teams passionately from psychological harm and really witnessed innovation and creativity happening while I was doing that, I had no turnover in the teams and no sick time other than COVID during that period, which demonstrated how much that passion for me keeping those teams safe mattered. But unfortunately, even in a team, in an organisation of 10,000 people, it just took one person's psychological harm to make me realise that this is not going to happen any longer. So that is really a summary of the story. I did during that period actually go back to university. I self-funded my own education from starting off as a foundation degree, leading right up to a Master of Science in Psychology. Now, the reason I wanted to study psychology was because I really, at this time in my life, wanted to understand why these behaviours happen. Why do people behave in such a way in life? And it was one day at work, the very last day. I'd had a very difficult day at work. I was at an event that should have been really exciting and I'd planned it for a long time. I'd endured microaggressive behaviours, inappropriate banter, being humiliated in front of people, that I got in my car on the way home and decided that was it. I was not going to stay in the NHS any longer. I was not going to tolerate these behaviours. I was not going to witness these behaviours, and I certainly wasn't going to sit back while it happens to other people. And on the way home that day, my neon lights for the NHS went off. My dream of being an executive in the NHS switched off. And it's important to say that that wasn't because of the many, it was because of the few throughout every organisation that I went into. And that's when the behaviour garage was born. So I'd left. I'd put in my notice. I worked my 3 months notice and I left the organisation because I decided that my sole passion in life was going to be to eliminate these harmful behaviours that not only had I endured, I'd witnessed happening to many other people. So at the behaviour garage, I decided that I was going to have a focus solely on behaviour. So often when our cars don't work properly, we take them to the garage to have fixed, but often where do we take our people when their behaviours are not as they should be? So one of the sessions I offer at the behaviour garage is inclusion with humanity. Now, you see, the purpose of inclusion with humanity is when individuals are treated unequally based on characteristics that in reality are arbitrary and irrelevant, we can inadvertently violate their fundamental human dignity and sense of belonging. And that's what I felt was happening to me in healthcare. And inclusion with humanity is a central part of any organisation's ethics and should be given due consideration in our moral working lives. But despite many years of discussing the matter of equality, diversity and inclusion, we continue with the same problems. So is now the time for radical change in language and behaviour. But when you join an organisation, any organisation, not just healthcare, what you see on the marketing is we are collective, we are compassionate, we care about our people. And of course, the macro organization wants that. Every organization wants itself to be compassionate, caring, collective, and no organization states that we suffer from bullying and harassment. We welcome you if you make people's life hell, if you shout at people, if you operate in a command and control relationship. You never see that offered. You never see that marketed, because the reality is organizations don't want that. So when I talk about macro marketing in organizations, of course, every leader in healthcare wants their organization, every executive or chief CEO wants the organization to be as it markets it. It's absolutely right. But what I felt and what I experienced over 28 years was it was the micro cultures in the organization that was causing that harm, not so much the macro vision that CEOs and other executives have for their business. So let me explain that a little bit further. Culture, as we know, is a serious business. Culture, as we know, is what is the make or break of successful organizations. So macro cultures, we all have them: organizational values, our vision statements, our objectives, standards, policies, procedures. But what can happen sometimes is, despite the organization's values, micro cultures can often form, which is localized beliefs and values, climatized group norms in teams where we believe that this climate is the organization, when actually it often isn't the case. It's just what's happening and accepted in that area. Shared patterns of behavior. Shared patterns of behavior that actually your macro organization's values might not approve, but often these shared patterns of behavior, often inappropriate, can be accepted in micro teams and services, which then causes behavior irregularity. Because like I said earlier, no organization will market the fact that they've got bullying, harassment or discrimination or health inequalities going on in their services. It's not going to happen because that's not what they want. But often behavior irregularity that happens locally can create that microculture. Levels of acceptance, where the leaders are willing to accept that behavior on behalf of the organization's overall values, or whether they're willing to challenge it. And assumptions, localized assumptions that distort the reality and the belief of what the wider organization's values are. People assume that this behavior is the norm. But when I talk about microculture, who are the culture creators? It's not your organizational's beliefs and values, policies and procedures. But you see, microculture creators, cultures, if harmful or toxic, can infest any service or department with a potential impact on the wider reputation. And if left unaddressed, the culture carries forward through to new starters, future members who believe this is the norm. But who causes this? As I said, the organization doesn't promote this behavior. 3 types of characters, I believe, in organizations who become the microculture creators. So just your food for thought, for your private thought. Who are you in your organization? Just food for your private thoughts. Who are the people around you? Are they a victim to harmful behaviors? Are they a perpetrator of harmful behaviors? Or are they a bystander to harmful behaviors? Because every organization, and I hope you agree, has them. We have victims who inadvertently fear speaking up and inadvertently create a culture of harm that is accepted because they fear speaking up. They worry about the outcomes. They worry about the consequences. We have the perpetrators who, if left unchallenged, continue with their perpetrating harmful behavior. Worse still, we have bystanders who stand by and then almost allow that behavior to be credible. That's what we do here. We bystand when those behaviors happen. 3 behavior patterns that can cause those microcultures to harm the macro vision of any organization. So just a pause for thought. Do you have victims in your organization? Do you have perpetrators who you know behave in this way? Do you have bystanders that stand by and allow this behaviour to continue? Now, is it time to radically change behaviours amongst them all? Another food for thought is EDI. We talk a lot about EDI. We have done for many, many years. Multi-millions of pounds worth of investment goes into EDI. A bit of food for your thought. Could the terminology and titling of these posts be adding to the problem? I am in no way criticising any EDI leads. I personally would have been lost without EDI leads in our organisation. I relied on them heavily. They do a wonderful job. This is not criticism to any EDI lead. But could the terminology be causing a problem? So food for your thoughts. For so long we've discussed this. So much tragedy has happened around the world to highlight the cruel side of inhumanity. Yet still exclusion from harmful excluding behaviours remains a huge problem within society and worryingly and increasingly within the workplace. Did you know you are more likely to be psychologically harmed in the workplace if you are a person of difference, i.e. colour, disability or sexuality, etc.? So for some alarming stats, I've got some alarming stats to share with you from NHS England. Just bear with me. So here are some facts from the RES data from 2020. 1.2 million people are employed by the NHS. Although I do refer this training to healthcare, this is available and bespoke to any organisation really, but bear with me with the figures on healthcare because that is my background. So 1.2 million people are employed in the NHS. A mere 20.7% of them belong to a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background. But tragically and statistically, according to NHS staff surveys, RES data, ACAS, people of colour and difference working in healthcare are twice as likely to be mocked, excluded, bullied, harassed, deprived of career progression, and worryingly and more recently, die during a pandemic. So again, I ask, why is the problem continuing despite millions of conversations, dramas, training, tragedies around the world and establishments set up to resolve this problem? Despite people of colour being the minority, we are still today statistically the most harmed in healthcare, psychologically harmed. So this is why I ask, is there a problem with the language that we're using? Are we causing divides? Are we alienating our white allies who we rely on so much to be included by? We rely on so much because they are the majority in most working environments, even today. Diversity. After all, in a modern society in 2022, why do we still need diversity training or discussions? Am I right in saying that diversity is a simple metric, recorded and monitored by our HR and people teams, and of course, very important to keep a close eye on that. Diverse organisations can sometimes be the most innovative organisations out there, so diversity is crucial. It's a fundamental metric to keep an eye on in any organisation. But often you'll see diversity training. Welcome to our diversity training. In reality, who would diversity suit? Cavemen. You see, in the cavemen time, there was very little diversity. It's a fact. But today we live in a diverse society, from hair colour to disabilities to voice tone to all these diverse aspects we have as human beings. And in reality today, it's a clear and blatant fact of life, and it's never going to change in our lifetimes. So for me, diversity is a mere metric, a very important one, but a mere metric. What would cavemen say if this bunch of people turned up? That is a time when diversity training would be really needed to explain to the picture on the left who the people are on the right. Then it comes to equality. Equality, as we know, is a legal framework, as is health and safety. So the knowledge of equality, of course, would sit with our legal teams, our equality experts, HR teams, legal experts. But you see, often using the word diversity, equality, and inclusion as one, could that be alienating our colleagues, our allies who we rely on so much? Because actually equality covers everybody. It covers everybody in the human race. For age, disability, gender, race, religion, belief, sex, everybody has a sex. Could mixing this word in with EDI potentially be causing the problem? Because equality, when it's mixed in with diversity, could it be alienating our white allies who we rely on so much? Because in reality, the Equality Act of 2010 legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and wider society. It covers every single one of us. We have a legal right to be protected under the Equality Act. It's a clear and blatant fact of life, and it's never going to change in our lifetime. Equality is set in law. Diversity is a fact of life. So how do we come up with a solution to the problem so barbarically continuing in healthcare today as we sit here? People will be being bullied, harassed, and excluded. Could inclusion with humanity be the answer? Because although in my experience of exclusion is through skin colour or differences in terms of personality, it's important to bear in mind all humans, regardless of skin colour and differences. Because why is it as children, we tended to include everybody or exclude them equally? Yet in adulthood, we can often knowingly or not exclude members of the human family. Why is this? Because all humans have a universal need to feel safe, to be liked, to be wanted, to be needed, to be included. And I'll go back to the point earlier about microcultures. In the workplace, it's often micro-formed toxic cultures and behaviours that cause the harm when it comes to exclusion, career inequalities, bullying, harassment that lead to the stats I showed earlier from the RES data. It's often not the organisation's vision. It's those microcultures and behaviours that are often accepted. You see, the human need for acceptance is huge. The feeling of social, emotional poverty is painful. But what if we were to focus on similarities and humanity first and put characteristics second? What if we were to educate people to put humanity first? What if we all maintained high principles of humanity in the workplace? Your sole qualification to be accepted by me is flesh and blood. I will genuinely include you for being human. I will accept you for who you are and welcome your differences. If we look at some adverts you see many advertisements today saying we welcome people from diverse backgrounds, we welcome people with disabilities. Why not change that to we welcome you for being part of humanity and we welcome the differences you bring? You see, self-segregation hinders inclusion. And often people will attempt to me in particular, to justify loyalty to characteristics above that of humanity. People will say to me, oh, I've got a black friend, so I can't be racist. I've got a disabled auntie, I've got a gay friend. Actually, we don't need tokenistic comments and lines of commitment to race, disability, gender. In today's society, we need true inclusion, respect, understanding, and the allowing of differences. Not asking people to come and fit in, not asking people to come to organisations and say, actually, to fit in here, you need to be this. That is the harm that people cause people by saying, if you want to fit in here, Ranjit, this is what you need to do. If you want to be an executive here, you need to change. See, to me, when people make comments like, I've got a black friend, I've got a disabled cousin, it's surface level tokenism. But actually what we need today is truly from the heart to make radical change happen within our workplace and our wider world. So what if we were to have that one rule of identifying similarities, putting biases to one side? Because if you look at the picture before you, although very different couples, both have the same emotions, the same feelings, the same injuries, the same outcomes if they're harmed. Is it time we started focusing on similarities? What is the likelihood of the people on the left walking into a healthcare or any organisation dressed the way they are, but the people on the right would be welcomed dressed the way they are? Why is that? Why is that in society that we would be more focused on people's differences rather than our similarities? Excluding behaviour is socially and emotionally and economically expensive to a victim. People withdraw, retreat, recoil, and avoid that harm at all costs. Harm that I believe we should describe in today's world as psychological harm. So as I move on to psychological safety versus psychological harm, often without realizing it, psychological harm is the bedrock of many organizations' problems. This type of harm can go unmeasured, unreported, and often left unactioned. However, if harming behaviors are left unchallenged, they become the microcultures I described earlier, and they infest the wider organization, its people and its values. Behaviors that engulf the organization with complaints, turnover, sick time, loss of production, and loss of motivation, loss of innovation. So for a definition of psychological harm, it means the emotional or physical damage of such nature as to cause fear, humiliation, distress, or impair the person's ability to enjoy the normal process of their life. These are the behaviors that can engulf organization with, like I've just said, complaints, turnover, sick time, loss of production, motivation, and innovation. And often we'll describe them as bullying, harassment, conflicts. In reality, could it be termed as psychological harm? Could we agree that actually it is an emotional, intentional infliction of emotional distress? Do we keep using those terms, bullying, harassment, clashes, conflicts? Do we allow these behaviors to continue? Or do we simply change the language and name it psychological harm? Because statistics are alarming. Statistics are alarming. Now let me share some more data with you. Anxiety, stress, depression, and other psychiatric illnesses, the most reported reason for sickness absence in healthcare pre and post-pandemic, according to NHS Digital in 2021. Our workforce is suffering. Our organisations are operating at a loss. Let me give you some stats on that loss. Over 570,000 full-time days last year were lost in sick time through stress, anxiety, or psychologically harmed conditions. 25% of all sickness absence in healthcare is caused by anxiety, stress, depression, or other psychiatric illnesses. Statistically and consistently, the most reported reason for sickness absence pre and post-pandemic. So why is this? Could it be a flight or fight mode that we enter when we experience in psychological harm at work? So flight or fight. So Professor Walton Bradford Cannon, an American neurologist and a huge he did a lot of behavioral studies. Now, the connection between Prof. Cannon's findings of fight or flight from psychological harm are profound in today's world and basically left unchallenged in the literature since 1930, other than some people call it fight, flight, or freeze. He described back in 1932 that psychological harm is the harmful human reaction that leads to fight or flight. In a book he released called The Wisdom of the Body, it's a very interesting book if anybody's interested in fight or flight and the harm it can do in your workplace. And even in today's world, it's recognized fight or flight reactions are regularly triggered in the workplace, more harmful than some may think. because psychological harmful behaviour triggers the acute pain centre in the brain, having a profound impact on how we behave, how we feel, how we live our lives. So could psychological harm in the workplace caused by those harmful microaggressive behaviours or passive-aggressive behaviours be contributing to the numbers of sick time that I've just showed you there? Evidently and statistically, the answer is yes. For fight or flight to be happening in our bodies, the more harm people cause us, the more harm is caused to us in the form of cortisol release. Too much cortisol in your workforce is harmful. Now, we all know cortisol, especially us in healthcare. Cortisol release is a negative chemical released in our brain when we are anxious, stressed, or in a mode of fight or flight. You see, when we're in a fight or flight response, and it could be even a micro behavior that makes us fight or flight, a comment, an aggressive email, a phone call, it could be anything that triggers a fight or flight. You can see in the picture before you the amount of harm that it does to you. Your heart beats faster, your bowel movements slow down, you breathe faster, your pupils dilate, your muscles become tense. Because if we accept psychological harm in our organizations, micro or macro, this is the harm we could be causing our colleagues by releasing cortisol into their bloodstream. In this state of cortisol release, when we have a weakened immune system, heart disease, anxiety, depression, headaches, nerve problems, digestive issues, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, in this state we malfunction. We have sick time, we're demotivated, we're demoralized, we lose interest, we become ill. For fight or flight and cortisol release in your workplace is harmful. So while people report sickness as any of the reasons I've mentioned there and you see before you on the slide, could this have been triggered by psychological harm? So when people ring up in sick because they've got a headache or they're suffering from migraines or they're having stomach problems, is that the real reason they're calling in sick? Or is it because they're avoiding psychological harm? Or is it because the symptoms they're reporting have been caused by psychological harm? And evidently and statistically, the answer is yes. So while we invest millions in health and safety, physical injury in the workplace is rare. It happens. 28 years in the NHS, I had one physical injury. I had hundreds of psychological injuries, hundreds of them. So why is it that we invest so much to keep our workforces physically safe, yet psychological harm can go unrecorded, unmonitored, or unaddressed? Often this behaviour, as we all know, can be left unchallenged. Often perpetrators of this behaviour can harm their victims while bystanders look on. Often this can become toxic cultures in many, many departments across healthcare and the wider world out there in terms of workplace. So really, what is the difference? Physical harm or psychological harm? There is no difference. What right have we got if we wouldn't go up to a colleague and physically harm them? What right have we got to psychologically harm them? Because really, in reality, if somebody's physically injured, they're off sick. If somebody's psychologically injured, they're off sick. And like physical injuries in the workplace that could lead to organizations being sued or fined or prosecuted, so does psychological harm. There's so many tribunals happening across the country because of psychological harm. There is no difference. We have no right to psychologically harm anybody as much as we wouldn't go up and physically assault a colleague. Yet the investment in psychological harm is quite rare. And I mean prevention of psychological harm. I'm not talking about occupational therapy and psychological services that will then help you once you're injured. I'm talking about true investment in psychological harm, that we prevent that injury from happening in the first place. Would you agree that if psychological safety was invested as much as health and safety, we would have fewer referrals to occupational health, fewer sickness cases, lesser need for psychological services to help people who have been damaged by this harm, because there is no difference. The emotional wounds are costly, not only to us as employees of any organisation, but to our organisation. Because physical wounds are not the only cost to your organisation. Because psychological and emotional wounds reduce performance, they silence innovation, they decrease motivation, you lose production, mental well-being declines, organisational success suffers, reputation is damaged. People leave the organisation, say, oh, I wouldn't work there, it's terrible. But actually the organisation might not be terrible. You see how the macro vision of any organisation can be damaged by those microclimates that are allowed to go on, those micro behaviours by people that is allowed to go on. Because actually, what does it increase? What do emotional wounds increase in your organisation? Sickness, absence, turnover, time wasted, processes taking much longer, workload, dealing with complaints, sickness, harassment, dealing with people being off sick. Stress it causes people, the conflict it causes in your organisation. So actually, as much as physical harm, our words and actions can truly harm people. Any one of us could inadvertently or directly harm somebody without actually assaulting them or physically harming them. Because in reality, we all have a shared identity. In reality, we're all the same. We have flesh, blood, feelings. As humans, we all need to feel valued, involved, and included. So how do we change behaviours now? Because we're in 2022, despite the multi-millions of pounds of money we invest in bullying, harassment, culture, all of these courses that I've been on in my years in the NHS, has it changed anything? I truly, personally believe it hasn't. It hasn't changed anything. We still today talk about those problems that we talked about when I joined the healthcare 28 years ago. How long will people tolerate this behaviour before everybody like me, when their neon lights go off, they walk away, turn away? Because actually, what is more worth it for me? What was more worth it for me? This highly paid senior job. I managed multi-million pounds worth of teams, budgets, multiple teams. I was paid a good salary, but actually the psychological harm wasn't worth it. I left all that. The neon lights went off. Now I'm on a mission now to make sure that neon lights don't go off for people, that we really do create a shared identity in the workplace. And I believe that behavioural science will help this. Behavioural science is a radically different way of training people. It really does target the emotional part of people's brains in your workplace, highlighting harms with the terminology of psychological harm. Because if you thought you were physically assaulting somebody, you wouldn't do it. I feel that a radical change is required now, that everybody in the workplace thinks about psychological harm as much as they think about physical harm. So we focus on psychological safety as much as we focus on health and safety. And that's what brings me to psychological safety and inclusive behaviour. Because recent research is suggesting psychological safety and inclusive behaviours could have a bigger and positive impact on the workplace behaviours than you think. Imagine a workforce where all behaviours were safe for all concerned, regardless of who you are. Imagine if every one of us placed psychological safety as our top priority, as we do health and safety. Because we all know using safe behaviours releases our happy chemicals. When we're feeling happy, we feel innovative. We can't wait to get to work. We can't wait to be with our colleagues. We can't wait to get there. And we really, truly invest our soul into the organisation because we're included, we're welcome, we're safe. In psychologically safe workplaces, diversity is respected and personal risk-taking is encouraged. By that, I mean people don't fear trying something new. People are not told this is the way we always do it here. People are not told that actually your way won't work. People are told, let's try it. Above all, team members respect each other and feel respected. Psychological safety ensures that we will respect each other for being part of humanity, for being part of our organisation, for being different, for being radically different from the norm. And that would be accepted, that would be normal. It's like the feeling of taking a leap and knowing you'll be caught. Not many people would leap if they thought they were going to be harmed. And it's these types of behaviours that release the happy chemicals in our brain. They block off cortisol release. They bring out dopamine, oxytocin, endorphin, which all medical people and people in healthcare know that when we feel like this, when these chemicals are released in our brain in any situation, our hearts become invested in that situation. Our hearts become invested in that organization's success. We reduce harm by behavior, keeping teams well, keeping us at work, keeping us keen to attend, keeping us there, retention in organizations. Because why would we go anywhere else if these chemicals were released every time we were at work? And it's when these chemicals are released in everybody at work that we reduce inequality, sick time, turnover, and the cost to your organization. We increase motivation, inclusion, and sense of belonging. But actually, in really large organizations such as the NHS or healthcare, it's not down to one person. Often people will say it's down to the leaders. Of course, the leaders set the tone, absolutely. But could a leader truly be responsible for every individual's behavior? Could a leader be responsible for being mindful of when cortisol has been released in everybody's brains, when that unhappy chemical is pouring through people? Or could it be each and every one of us that are responsible for that? Just like we are with health and safety. Each and every one of us is responsible to keep our workplaces healthy and safe. What if we were to say that about everybody being responsible for psychological safety? You see, inclusion with humanity and psychological safety requires the power of many. It cannot be down just to leaders. It can't be just down to victims to speak up. It can't just even be down to bystanders to act. It's down to every one of us to remove the perpetrating behavior that causes this psychological harm in the workplace. And it relies on the power of many. So please make it your business to care in your organization. Please look around you. Look around you in your organization. Are there victims there silently suffering? Are there perpetrators there getting away with this behavior and never being challenged for it? Are there bystanders there that are actually condoning that behavior by not speaking up, acting, or doing nothing? Please make it your business to care. Please go back in your workplaces and look around you, reflecting on what I've said today. Now, that is a very short snapshot of 6 hours of training in total to get through these full courses. And I thank you very much for listening to me today. And I thank Steph for having me here today. Thank you very much. If you are interested in what you've heard today, well, there's a very snapshot summary of it, to be fair, do contact me, ranjit at thebehaviourgarage.co.uk. The training is bespoke at the minute to healthcare providers. That is where my expertise lies. It can be delivered to any organisation who feels that they have these types of behaviour problems. I'm at Curtin Ranjit on Twitter. I'd love to hear what you've got to say about it, good or bad. Some people say it's controversial. Some people like it. Let's see what you have to say about it. Thank you very much, Steph, for having me here today. And thank you all for attending to listen to that very short summary of what I had to say today. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Ranjit. And we do actually have some time to take some questions if people would like to do that. I'm just going to fiddle on with some technical stuff while people start thinking about questions that they might want to answer. The first one, though, I mean, a couple of things that have struck me whilst you were talking there, Ranjit. First of all, when you described those high principles of humanity, I had shivers. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. That idea of could people actually, could we behave like that? Could we have that? It was fantastic. So, and I know I've seen on Twitter that was taken by some others. And also the concept of taking a leap and knowing you'll be caught as being the kind of organisation you want. And that really chimed with me because I've always described the NHS as being that safety net that catches people. And as you say, unfortunately, whilst that might be the case in the care provision it gives, it's not necessarily the case that it gives. But I'm first of all really interested in the training. So as you say, we've had EDI training up the wazoo, just so much of it, and it hasn't changed a single thing. So why does your training, why is it different? How can it help us to make a difference? Because we can't do it alone.
Thanks, Steph. That's a really good question. I think for me, having sat through many of the sessions myself, actually often I've left training sessions more angry and probably discriminative than I went in. And I feel that a lot of our training sessions alienate our white allies who we rely on so much, because suddenly we feel that we have this focus on people of colour or people with disabilities, making them a priority. And actually that is not what the training should do, because I feel that a lot of our training is putting people into groups. You are a member of the BME group, you are a member of the disability group, you are a member of the LGBT group, and that's excellent to be close with allies and people of like-minded conversations. But actually, are we causing a problem? With my training, it's very behavioural science based. So I talk a lot about emotional contagion. I go deeply into the bystander effect and how that can cause group conformity. It talks a lot about behaviours, and it focuses solely on behaviours. And also, it's quite hard hitting in reality. Of one of my sessions I call Fight, Flight, or RIP, and I talk about a case of a nurse that committed suicide because of psychological harm, and it really hits the emotional side of human beings. The other thing I do in my training, which is quite different to the norm, often when you go in a training session, you'll be put into a group chat, you'll be put into a breakout room, you'll be told to go away and do work in groups. A lot of research says that creates group conformity. So if one person has a strong belief, you're more likely to agree with them. In my training, I ask people to sit as individuals. I don't put people into groups. I ask people to reflect on their own behaviours. And what it does, which I believe other training sessions don't, is it targets emotions. It targets people's inner deep responsibilities in terms of causing other people harm. It takes away a lot of the terminology, bullying, harassment, aggression, conflicts, or they're just having a conflict. Actually, no, it's psychological harm. It's an intentional infliction of harm. And I believe that change in language is what is truly going to change behaviours. I could be wrong.
And I think it is. It's so powerful, isn't it? Because, as like you said, none of us would want to go out and intentionally stab somebody or even punch somebody, maybe. But that thought that for most of us that we are harming others is actually quite shocking. And I know that if somebody, and I've had an incident recently where I thought something, that my reaction to something may have caused harm, and that wasn't the intention. So to then go back to that person and say, I'm really sorry because this was my reaction and it may have harmed you. Fortunately, it hadn't, and I explained why I'd come to that conclusion and things. But we are not people who want to go out. Most people don't want to go out and harm others. So that change of language, because harassment is kind of like, nowadays it's harassment. People say, I'm really harassed today, don't they?
Yeah. And the word bullying, there's actually no legal definition of what bullying is. Mm-hmm. If you look in the literature, there is no legal definition of bullying. So if somebody says, I am feeling bullied, we then actually put that person into a state of prove it. How are you being bullied? And actually, it's how you're made to feel, isn't it, if you're being bullied? And right, Evelyn's just typed racism is racism. It absolutely is. Racism is racism. But you know what I find, Evelyn? Back in the day, when we used to watch comedies and programs where racist language and racist behavior was accepted, and over the generation, I think from about the start of 2000, a lot of those programs and channels were removed off the telly, if you remember, because they weren't politically correct in today's world. I believe, again, I could be right, I could be wrong, people, when I first started the NHS stuff, as I was talking to you about on Friday, people would blatantly use racist terms with me back in the day when it was accepted. Now that you couldn't say those words, could it be that we've replaced that behaviour with microaggression and passive aggressive behaviours? Because people who want to be racist actually can't be now, because if you use those words in the workplace, you would be dealt with. And the other thing I wanted to say is, when I suffered psychological harm in the workplace, and I'm going to call it nothing else, there was one trust I sat for 2 years alone in the canteen because I was so excluded. I would rather have been physically assaulted than dealt with the psychological harm I dealt with in 28 years in healthcare. I would rather have been physically assaulted by one of those members of staff. And the reason I say that, because that would have been dealt with. That would have been dealt with a lot quicker. What I would like to do is encourage organisations to deal with psychological harm in the same way.
And I think that thing about calling it out for what it is really important. So if it's racism, yes, it's racism. The effect of the racism is psychological harm. And we know that the effect of long-term psychological harm on people of colour actually shortens our lives. There's no doubt about it. It has an impact on our lives because we carry that with us. We carry that stress. We carry all of that burden, and that makes us unwell, as you described really well there. We've got a couple of minutes left, and there's somebody, Robert has said, is there an opportunity to create a support group within the dominant culture for the cause and have a workplace buddy that supports you to start a ripple effect? Because actually as an individual, it's really hard to do something. And I personally am really happy that so many people have joined this who aren't Black. Because it's about having other voices that are all there, hearing the same thing and saying the same thing and supporting. Would you agree, Ranjit?
Yeah, I do actually. And often, some of my, as I've said, there was a lot of wonderful people. I met so many wonderful people in healthcare. Without those allies and people who were willing to listen, I would have been lost. I think it's excellent to have support groups. I think it's excellent to have colleagues who are really going to engage with your problem, because often towards the end of my career, I felt that your pain's your own. I can't keep being the complainer. I can't be the one that keeps raising it. But actually, if we had support groups that people could truly understand the pain and the harm that it's causing a person, that could speak out on behalf of you, I think it all adds to that allyship that's so important in healthcare today. Yeah. But again, I would say a lot of EDI, as it's known, training sessions, alienate people who could be our colleagues, who could be our allies, because often we make our white colleagues feel as though we're segregating them in certain training sessions, and that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is get the message across that our feelings are just as painful as others. Allies are one of the biggest thing that kept me going in the NHS for so long.
It is difficult because there is this thing of people feel attacked when we talk about our experiences. And I'm sorry, but I'm one of these people that would say, if you feel attacked because I'm describing my experiences, you need to look at your behaviour, because there's something in what I'm saying that is triggering something in you. It's not that my experiences are wrong. It's that you need to think about, when have you been a bystander? When have you actually perpetrated some of this? It's not about me. It's about you. So I think there is something about everybody needs to own their own behaviour. It can be really difficult if you're a victim to come forward, and that's why it's important to have people there that can support you. But yeah, it's that thing of, whilst we don't want to alienate necessarily people, I think it's really important that we are truthful about the experiences that we have.
Yeah. And more allowing people to be different, I think, rather than, criticizing.
And even within kind of ethnicity, it's like I'm the wrong kind of Black woman. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm still a Black woman, and it's the person that I am. So, it's about allowing us to have those differences regardless. And to be supported and valued for who we are. I think you said that so well there. So there's tons of questions in the chat, and we'll share all of the chat with people along with the video link afterwards. Just to explain why Ranjit was reading out the slides as well, this is going to be available as a podcast, so it was really important that she did that. She wouldn't normally read slides out in a presentation.
I wouldn't normally read the slides. I found that really hard, actually. Normally I ask the audience to read them, but I did have to read them all. It's not a rule I normally have.
No. But so yeah, this is going to be available as a as video and as a podcast version, and we are planning other events. So our next event is actually on the 16th of May, and that's going to be about power and privilege. And I've got the amazing Ngozi Lynn Cole coming to talk with me about power and privilege. I just want to say thank you again, Ranjit. I mean, when you get a chance to see all of the comments and some of the stuff that's on Twitter, then you'll get an appreciation of how people have taken today's session. It has been thought-provoking. I'm sure not everybody will agree with absolutely everything that you say, but I know that you are always open for that discussion. And I know when we discussed this session, you said this is about you. You're not telling people this is the way it is. You're proposing different ways of thought.
Because I'm no expert in terms of how we're going to radically change this behaviour. I have just got an idea that I am asking people, could this be the problem?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it really it's resonated. I think things that you've said have resonated with a lot of us. So thank you so much for that. Thank you to everybody that has joined. I think just to plug again, as I say, these are free events, but we are asking if people can, you don't have to, but if you can, to donate to charity, and the link again is in the chat and in the comments for that. So thank you everybody so much. Our next event next month, the 16th, and the link to book that is live now. So thanks everybody.
Thank you for all the lovely comments, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I will go through everyone. Thank you so much.
And take care.